So hope you had a good lunch too. We've got 3 sessions between now and our next break. Just a reminder, slido.com, which you'll see up here. The hashtag is NSCyber2021, all together, all one word, NSCyber2021. You've got questions you want to ask as we go along, please ask them via Slido. I'll make sure we put as many, if not all of them, to our speakers. So during this session, the third of our 3 sessions, we're going to talk about cyber skills and talent retention. In the middle, we're going to talk about remote and hybrid working. But first up, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. I'm going to do that in the company of Caroline Bailon, who is Security Research and Innovation Lead at AXA. So how AI systems can be attacked, some real-life examples, what can be done to harden AI systems. Then, as I say, some questions to end with. So anything not clear, please ask those questions. But without further ado, Caroline, please come to the stage.
Thank you so much. So indeed, I'm going to be talking to you today about hacking AI systems. A lot of companies are rapidly deploying AI systems at the moment. And in their excitement about AI, many companies aren't necessarily thinking enough about how the AI systems that they're implementing can be hacked. I also think the topic is especially important because as we make more and more use of AI, malicious actors are growing and will continue to grow, increasingly interested in attacking AI systems. So in response, within my company, I set up a research stream looking specifically at AI cybersecurity. And so I designed my talk today as sort of a basic introduction to AI cybersecurity. I wanted to really try to explain it in a clear way, how AI systems can be hacked, and also what some of the potential ways to mitigate these risks are from a technical standpoint. Because this was something I really struggled with myself, and I spent months and months trying to learn this. So I'm hoping I can save you some of that pain. So that's my outline. So first of all, when we're talking about attacks on AI systems these days, we're pretty much talking about attacks on machine learning. Because machine learning is a subset of AI, and it's the area where the most progress has been made in recent years. And so machine learning involves teaching machines to learn by themselves without the need for a human to explicitly program them. And then, so before I talk about the main types of attacks on AI systems, I want to explain that adversaries are going to use different attack methods depending on the level of access and knowledge that they have regarding the AI model that they want to attack. And so you have white box, black box, and gray box methods. So white box attack methods are one in which the adversary has complete access to the AI model that he's targeting. So the code, the architecture of the model, all of that. And it might also include access to the data set that was used to train the model. And these types of attacks are often found in academic papers to demonstrate theoretically how an attack can be carried out. So those are more theoretical. Then black box attack methods are ones where an adversary doesn't have access to the AI model that he's targeting, and he doesn't know anything about how it works. He doesn't know the code, he doesn't know the architecture, he doesn't know the data that was used to train the model. And so what an adversary is going to do is to obtain information about the model, he's going to typically conduct repeated queries of the model. So this often means carrying out queries of a web interface powered by the model, because a lot of models are online at the moment. And so then by observing the output of the model, the adversary can derive information about how the model is architected and make an approximate copy of the model. Because sort of like as you get responses back, it allows you to sort of figure out how that model was probably constructed. Hopefully that makes sense. And so then the adversary, once the adversary has figured out how he thinks the model has been constructed, then they can use white box attack techniques on sort of an approximate model that he's created, or you can call it a shadow model. And then you also have gray box attack methods. So those are attack techniques in between white box and gray box techniques. So in this case, an attacker has partial information about the AI model that he's targeting. And so in gray box attacks, the adversary designs attacks against a model that has known features of or is similar to the model that he's targeting. Because, again, he doesn't have complete information, but he sort of, does his best to create a model that he does his best to create what he thinks is the model. And then attacks that are developed against similar models are likely to work against the actual targeted model. So he tries to get as much information as he can and create an approximated model. So hopefully that made sense. Any questions on that, actually? Okay, great. All right, so now I'll move on to discussing the different types of attacks against AI systems. So there's three main types: poisoning attacks, evasion attacks, and inference attacks. And then some background I think that's useful, a lot of background, but before I explain each type of attack. Attacks can occur at different phases of the AI pipeline. So they can occur during the training phase, which is when the model is learning, or they can occur during the production phase. So that's when the model is deployed and actually in operation. And attacks in the training phase can actually occur more frequently than you might think, because in many cases, AI models that are in the production phase are learning continuously from the input. So they're still being trained. And then most AI models are periodically retrained using new data. So hopefully that makes sense. And I will move on to discussing poisoning attacks. So I'm pretty sure everybody's heard about these. So these are the most common types of attacks on AI systems. They occur during the training phase, and they involve tampering with the training data or algorithm in order to cause an AI model to misclassify the input data and produce an incorrect output. So they're also referred to as integrity attacks because they attack the integrity of the data. So we're all familiar with integrity attacks. So there's many different poisoning attack techniques. The technique that an attacker is going to employ depends in part on his level of access to and knowledge of the model, as I mentioned earlier. So, for example, is it possible for the attacker to modify the algorithm? So then that might be one, if he can, that might be one attack technique that he uses. Is it possible for him to modify the existing training data or the labels that are associated with the data? That could be another attack technique that he uses. Or maybe he can't modify the existing data, but he can inject new data. And so that would be yet another attack technique. So I'm not going to go into detail about all of those examples on the slide, but I just thought you might want to read them while I was talking in case you wanted more information. And those are just some of them, some of the big ones. In terms of how poisoning attacks are used, they're frequently employed against security products. So they can be used to bypass malware or spam classification systems and network anomaly detection systems. They can also be used to tamper with online recommendation systems, so causing them to improperly promote certain recommendations. And I think, at least in that's really particularly important at the moment, just we have so much disinformation. I mean, that's definitely something that I worry about. So hopefully that made sense on poisoning attacks. So now we move on to evasion attacks. These are actually the most complex to explain. So evasion attacks also aim to cause the AI model to misclassify the input data and produce an incorrect output, so just like poisoning attacks. But where they differ is evasion attacks do so during the production phase rather than during the training phase. So there's many types of evasion attacks, but the most common example involves attacks against what we call image classifiers, which are really important in computer vision. So more specifically, evasion attacks involve intentionally altering an input image so that to us, it appears totally normal to the human eye, but to the AI model, it's going to look totally different. And so in that way, you can fool the model into misclassifying the input and producing an incorrect output. And I'm actually going to show an example in a minute because I think it's easier to explain it that way. But basically, it's possible to make the model think that an image is something else entirely, or you can make the model see something that isn't there, or ignore something that is. And again, in my talk, I have to keep sort of giving some background, but I'm going to give a bit of background about classifiers because I don't know how familiar people are with them, and it's important to understand the rest. So classifiers are a type of AI algorithm that, when given an input, they're able to predict its label, which is also called its class. So image classifiers, as you would expect, are just classifiers that are trained to recognize images. So examples are always the easiest. So let's say you input a picture of a cat. It's going to predict its class to be cat. And then usually that'll be accompanied by the classifier's probability estimate of the image being the cat or being in that class. Because, you know, classifiers aren't completely sure, so they usually have a probability estimate associated with them. They make use of supervised learning, which is the most common branch of machine learning today. So in supervised learning, you train an algorithm by providing it with a lot of labeled training data that contains both the inputs and then the correct output labels. So for example, you know, as inputs, you might provide it with a lot of different images of animals as inputs, but then you're also going to tell it, these are the output labels, you know, so associated with each image. And so basically the algorithm can use this to learn how to classify the data by identifying patterns. And then it can use what it's learned when given new unlabeled data and make predictions about the class of this data that it has. So I might have lost people there. I think I probably should have had a picture, but hopefully it gave you the background that you needed. I think I'm going to do, I think an example will be the best way. So some further details about how these attacks work. So classifiers, basically they classify data by learning decision boundaries so that they can divide data points into classes. So what adversaries can do is they can examine these decision boundaries to determine how to modify an input so that one or more data points in the input cross to the other side of the decision boundary. And so, like, hopefully that image is helpful. You know, if you're an attacker, you're trying to, you know, you've worked out where that decision boundary is, and you're trying to, you know, like, figure out how you can, you know, trick the model into misclassifying it. So what an attacker can do is it can make small changes to the pixels in an image to cause them to cross the decision boundary in order to cause the algorithm to classify the image incorrectly. So this picture is a good example. So this is what happens when all an attacker has to do is add a layer of carefully crafted data noise to an image of a panda. So this is the really famous example. So here's our image of a panda. The attacker adds this data noise. Like to us, to humans, you know, we don't see any difference, right? Like it looks like exactly the same image. You know, it's a panda. But to the machine learning system, it thinks that it's an image of a gibbon, an ape. So I think that's a really powerful example. To us, it looks the same. To the computer, it looks completely different. They're called evasion attacks because in these attacks, the input is disguised so that it evades proper classification. They're also referred to as adversarial examples. So you'll hear that a lot because they involve inputs that are basically intentionally designed to cause the model to make a mistake. And their type of availability attack that we're all familiar with, they compromise the availability of a model to produce the correct output. So some of the most well-known examples of these attacks involve driverless cars. So for example, like you've probably read about this in the news, I think, because there's always kind of a lot of press hype around driverless cars. So like there's a piece of research where researchers have demonstrated how applying stickers or graffiti to a stop sign, because remember the stop sign is basically the input data for a driverless car, how that can trick the car into thinking it's actually a speed limit sign. And so then you can cause the driverless car to accelerate instead of to stop. So that's not great. And that's a theoretical attack for now. We haven't seen it, but it's definitely concerning. And then other instances where we see these attacks, you can use them to fool systems for facial detection, fingerprint recognition systems, other visual authentication systems, and there's a lot of other instances. So, okay, so good job, because that was actually the most difficult thing to explain, and people still seem pretty alert. So thank you for staying with me. Okay, so this is the last one in terms of types of attacks, and it's also really easy to explain. So these are inference attacks. That's our third type of attack on AI systems. And so inference attacks, yeah, good. Inference attacks are attacks that can be used to extract information from or about a model. And they can also be used to obtain some or all of the data that was used to train the model. And so because of this, inference attacks are also called privacy attacks. They're a type of confidentiality attack. So there's a lot of different attack techniques that can be used. Again, I've got a super long slide. And again, that's not all of it, but I've just listed some of them. But one of the most common types are input inference attacks. And so you use these to extract data from the training data set. So for example, an attacker can employ this against, say, an image classification model to extract a particular image from the training data set. So say an attacker has an individual's name, for example, he can attack the person's photo that was used in the training data set. So it has a lot of privacy implications that are quite worrisome. Or you've got model extraction attacks. They can be used to obtain information about the model itself. In terms of how we might see these being used, attackers can use these attacks to obtain information about the model itself, how it's architected. And then remember at the beginning we were talking about white box and black box and gray box attacks. So they can use that information, like once they know how the model is architected, they can use it to carry out more advanced attacks like black box attacks. And again, attacks to obtain the training data can be a major concern for companies, as that can be a way for attackers to obtain customer data. That's really important in light of GDPR. I think to me that's particularly concerning. Okay, so that was our intro into how systems can be hacked. I'm just, I think, I know that I already threw a lot of information at people, so I'm sort of, trying to gauge the room in terms of how much more I can throw at you. But I'm going to talk just a bit about the solution space. So how can we defend against these attacks on AI systems? So there's a lot of work done, but defending against them it's still pretty challenging because there's just so many techniques that attackers can employ. And so a lot of the current mitigation tactics that are out there can only close a small number of the potential vulnerabilities. So I'm just gonna give an overview of some of them. It's not at all exhaustive, but it's just to give you an idea of the solution space. So cryptography, that can be applied. That's effective against both poisoning and inference attacks. So that's really useful in cases where, let's say you've got a lot of parties involved, you've got data owners, you've got model owners, they want to jointly share resources involving a machine learning model, but they don't necessarily trust each other. And so one approach is homomorphic encryption, which I think you all know, that's a form of encryption that basically makes it possible to perform calculations on encrypted data without decrypting it first. And so data owners can encrypt their data and send it to a model owner who inputs the encrypted data into the model. The model's output is still encrypted, shared with the relevant parties. They can decrypt it. And so then the output, once decrypted, it's exactly the same as if it had been performed on unencrypted data. I mean, there's all kinds of other techniques. You can use software regression testing techniques, you know, to sort of check, like, how is the model performing after changes have been made. If the changes seem too big or too major, you know, you might want to examine the training data for signs that it might have been tampered with. Anyway, I mean, I'm just trying to sort of pick a few to concentrate on. I think one you'll read a lot about is called adversarial training. So this is when it comes to evasion attacks. So one approach that you can use is basically to create adversarial examples and include them in the training data set, right? So in this way, the model is prepared when it sees them. But that's really mostly effective against straightforward attacks that make use of adversarial examples that are basically common and that are created using straightforward techniques. You can't, you know, there's just no way you can't train a model against all possible adversarial examples. There's another technique to defend against evasion attacks. It's to detect and clean the inputs. So basically, you can put a protective mechanism in place between the public interface of a model that basically receives raw inputs and then the model itself. And so that protective mechanism can then detect and clean any raw inputs that could be adversarial before they reach the model. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that people are looking at to clean the inputs. You can generate an image that's similar to that original raw image input, and then you can input the generated image into the model. So in that way, like, you've inputted your own image that you've generated, so you know that the input isn't going to be malicious. You can transform the input in a way that removes, you know, any, like, you can basically try to remove any adversarial perturbations that have been applied before they reach the model. So, like, one thing you can do is you can compress an input image, because that's gonna remove, you know, if there is malicious data in that image, that's going to remove a lot of it. So, I mean, there's a lot of techniques. Against evasion attacks, there's also a technique that people use called gradient masking. So if you remember earlier, we were talking about classifier models and decision boundaries, and, you know, we took a look at the image with the decision boundaries. So the way an attacker carries out those attacks is basically probes the model in order to try to figure out the gradient of the decision boundaries. So you can see that here. And so when the attacker is doing that, he can basically figure out how to design adversarial examples. So how to perturb an input so that one or more of the data points in the input cross to the other side of the data boundary, right? And so what gradient masking does, as you can see, is it creates much sharper decision boundaries. So it's way more difficult when an attacker is probing the model to try to figure out where that decision boundary is going to be. So great. And then I think last point on inference attacks is differential privacy. So the idea behind differential privacy is an algorithm basically adds noise to a model's output. So it strikes a balance between utility and preserving privacy. So it still provides useful information to legitimate users of the model. Like, they can you know, figure out broad patterns in that data. But then the information isn't really precise enough for an attacker to be able to obtain sensitive information about a particular individual in the data set. So it still does protect the privacy of that individual. So I'm going to conclude. I hope that was somewhat clear to understand. Good job for staying with me. I think the last thing I want to say is just like how important it is to be aware of the risks involving AI. I mean, AI is obviously really exciting, but it's also important to figure out, to be thinking about the risk mitigation and to raise awareness within our companies, because especially we have to remember that the attack methods that we see now, they're going to be growing in coming years, and we're going to be seeing new attack methods. So thank you so much. I think there's 2 minutes left. I'm sorry.
If you wouldn't mind. We've definitely got time for one question, I think. We've got a couple there. Let me just ask you these questions, and thank you very much for explaining that and to keeping going while the lights were doing their own thing. I think the lights got hacked, and you did very well to ignore that. Which of the three attacks, poisoning, evasion, I think that should be inference, which of the three attacks is most common? And perhaps which is most harmful?
Good question. I mean, to be honest, it depends a little bit. It depends a little bit on just like, I was talking about different use cases. So, it's going to depend to a certain extent. But I'd say poisoning attacks are kind of the classic ones that everybody knows about. But as we're going towards driverless cars and image recognition, we're going to see, a lot. I expect to see a lot of attacks against classifiers. I mean, it's just too early. We're not yet there in driverless cars.
Indeed, which leads us to the second question, which is, a lot of this is, and whoever wrote that says fascinating, thank you. So there you go, fascinating stuff, and it was. Most of this seems theoretical at the moment. Yeah. Are there any real-world attack examples out there right now?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, definitely, when it comes to, and, you don't hear about it that much, right? But, when it comes, I think probably a lot of people in the room are defenders, right? When it comes to anomaly detection or something, you would definitely see it in security products for sure.
Very good. Caroline, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
I'm learning. I suspect we're all learning. That's very good stuff. Excellent. Let's move on. We've got 20 minutes now in this company of Alan Sanchez, EMEA CISO, Senior Evangelist at Fortinet, and possibly my favorite title of a presentation so far today, You Can't Go Home Again, Why 2022 Will Not Be 2019. Alan, please.
Thank you very much. Do you mind if I shed a light on the last question of the previous presentation?
Of course.
Right? Because I really liked what Caroline explained to us. Very, very enlightening. And yes, we do use some of these algorithms when it comes to recognize an attack. We take some elementary tests and we weight them. And when we reach a probabilistic value that is over a threshold, we tell the firewall, do that, isolate that, kill that, or do nothing. Now, that technology of wait and if and or and then is 200 years old. It can't be presented as innovation. It was George Bull in Lincolnshire, east of Manchester, who invented it, right? When we deserve the eye, when we start to become intelligent, is the weight associated to all these tests is reevaluated dynamically. And this is why it's called machine learning, because we learn from it. Was it too high? Yes, it was, because we know what's coming, right? So that, and that goes into what you beautifully explained. So sorry, I couldn't resist to answer that question. Okay, so this is about what has changed in the last, I would say, 2 years. Because from being a CISO only 2 years ago and being now is almost a different job. And I wanted to go through one of the things that I have personally learned into doing that, and that's by talking to people like you, by the way, right? So one of the things that is interesting is to put things into context. We're having all these issues to solve from an attack perspective because we are into a dynamic transformation. And we love it, right? We love to be able to access to our financial counselor on a mobile application and ask him questions that would have required an appointment that took 15 days to take as regards to, can I invest into this company? Is this company safe enough, etc. And look at these numbers here. We're talking hundreds of billions of pounds with a growth rate of 44%. So there's nothing we can do to stop that. Even if, as cybersecurity officers, we would like to say, no, too much risk when you go collaborative, etc. It's not sustainable. The board doesn't want us to be the Mrs. or the Mr. Nose, right? So we got to cope with that, and that's a common denominator of the changes that we've seen so far. In financial sector, there's been a world of innovation in only 2 years. First of all, because we could not get closer to the people physically, we had to get to know them using analytics. And we had to make the numbers speak even more than we used to do. And for that, we had to bring to the party other experts of data analytics, because in-house, you don't find these skills. It's an endemic problem of cybersecurity in general, but it also is a problem. You bring people to the party. Before we design these new financial services, rather than having a group of people completely isolated and coming up with an idea, we bring real customers, and we bring security people to the party. And all of a sudden, you realize that you've opened, through a collaborative application, a database to people you don't really know about, except that they are super experts that you need at a certain point in time. They bring computers with an access to the database that is not part of your inventory. Or these people working from home, and maybe they are accessing to this business critical application through the family PC that just downloaded from a game server that is not so clean, some very fancy games an hour ago, right? And you allow these people to collaborate. So all these innovations here, artificial intelligence is one of them. We've just been through that. It's passionating to see how much of artificial intelligence, i.e. machine learning, we have now, not only in cybersecurity, but within the financial application, within the risk assessments application, within the behavioral assessments applications. However, all this, let me say it again, as users, we love all that. We've been adopting them. We've been paying for them. So we kind of are the origin of this digital innovation. And another thing we've done is we're in a better position to have proven ourselves as cyber officers in the eyes of the stakeholders and the big guys. Only, I would say, 5 to 6 years ago, we were not really part of the boardroom discussions, right? We were tiptoeing. Do you mind if I change your antivirus? I promise I won't bother you anymore, right? I was mentioning earlier that the World Economic Forum has created an organism called C4C, Center for Cybersecurity. Believe me, a few years ago, they couldn't even spell cybersecurity. We're talking prime ministers of these words, and today they're creating an entity around it, right? So we've proven that anytime you put a penny into cybersecurity, it brings us some benefits. We've proven that to our stakeholders, we've proven that to our users, we've proven that to the board as well. However, anytime we've been kind of dragged into this innovation, and virtuous circle, by the way, there's a risk associated to it. And we have to deal with it as a by-effect of the digital innovation growth that I was depicting earlier. For instance, 40% of all the things that connect to our networks, to phrase it more simpler, we have no clue what are the OS versions, what are the patches, what are the programs, there's nothing we can do about it, right? New partnerships, because we don't have in-house all the skills to propel that digital innovation. The ecosystem is becoming incredibly complex. I think Gartner analysts talk about 20 billion of connected objects to our information system. That is called the OT-IT convergence. And these devices were created at a time where the manufacturers, and again, they've brought a lot of benefits, but had invested a lot of research and development, and they had to cash these R&D expenses. Yes? As people from the financial community, you understand that language. So you find very rudimentary devices. Maybe this one is one of them. You know, it's connected probably in HF to some sort of clicker on the PC. Where do I find the CPU and the memory to secure that? There is none. It's very rudimentary. It's been designed for the minimum cost. And we have to deal with that. This conference, we have on the cloud the voice and video stream that go to people that are connecting to us. We have these microphones connected to this antenna, another flow of information, probably very rudimentary and easy to hack. But that's part of the beauty of having this conference with people connecting. So we're going for it. And the cyber maturity, the ability to raise the cyber culture is absolutely crucial. We have to explain to people why we are doing a 2 or sometimes more factor authentication, because it really bores everybody to receive an SMS and say, oh yes, as it was not hard enough to memorize a password, now I have to open this, which has a code to open it, and look into an SMS, right? So when you explain what is at stake, when you explain the why to your users, then you're in a better position to increase it. And we win on many fronts as we do that. Now, there was supposed to be an animation. Behind this beautiful picture, there was a graphic of the rising numbers of records that have been stolen over the last 20 years. And that number has grown 3 orders of magnitude. In 2000, there were several millions of records that were reported stolen. We're talking several billion now. So what sort of defense mission has seen its enemy multiplied by 3 orders of magnitude? That is the kind of mission we are in, right? So in the past, we said we were at work. It means we had basically an Ethernet physical link connected to a data center. And now we connect from everywhere. We have sophisticated applications, very sophisticated devices to connect to these applications. And the overall complexity of this ecosystem we have to secure. And basically, it always comes back to this. You have on the left-hand side of this slide many devices, and I was mentioning billions of them, lots of users, completely different profiles, that want to take advantage of all the beautiful and innovative applications that you can see on the right-hand side. And you have 2 things to do as you want to do that. The first one is relatively straightforward. You move the bytes from one end to the other, right? That's the networking mission. Not simple, but relatively straightforward. And then you have another one, which is the security thing. You have to do that securely. So this is just, you recognize that, one of the typical attack schemes as it has been modelized by a very famous entity. And the point is, there are many different steps operating at completely different places on the network, and there can be 1 month between every of these attacks. So they would sleep, they would be activated by some external or internal factor. And by the way, internal, external is a very dangerous vocabulary to use. It means nothing for a conference like that. We are inside and outside at the same time. And the other danger is when we say internal, we tend to believe this is safe, right? It's not. So the new paradigm is we have to deal with that sort of connectivity that merges the security and the networking. And that we call it security-driven networking. It means that you cannot design innovation now. If you do have innovation in mind and then you go, oops, I have to secure it, it's over. You've been attacked in the meantime. So you have to put, second step, you have to put the security agenda at the front end of the design. And for a while, it was a bit of a burden. Now, the table has turned a bit, where because we know about the cybersecurity innovation, we can be more daring. We can dare to do things and explain the boards that, yes, there are scenarios of risks, each one associated with a level of investment. They have to choose that, which scenario is theirs, and then we go about executing it. One of the big mistakes that, as a community, we've made is we decided which scenario was the best, and we kind of try to impose it to the board. When we put the board in a situation to choose between different risk scenarios, and we become the execution mechanism of that scenario, we are in a better position to execute it. And there is this idea of zero trust, probably one of the worst vocabulary we've ever come up with. Because the last thing you want to do is to lose trust into your teams and your customers and your vendors, because every human activity is based on trust. However, it's a brilliant idea. It is not granting anything until you have a good reason to do it. There was a gentleman from Denmark, I think, that basically developed this concept about email protection. It's part of this brilliant idea. So it's not because you have the keys of the car that you won't be recognized as driving in a manner that you've never done. For instance, when a credential is stolen by a malware, and the malware being a ransomware, one of the things it does almost every time is open every single folder and directory and file that this authentication credential allows to do. A user never does that. You don't open your computer and go. When this happens and other conditions are met, even if the credentials are absolutely legitimate, there is something wrong. So, yes, the car has started, but the way it's driven, the speed it's driven, the itinerary, that's not daddy, right? So that raises a flag, and we do something with this flag. This is the essence of zero trust. And that has changed a lot in its implementation over the last 2 years. Now, AI was covered in the previous presentation, absolutely enlightening. And we use that sort of algorithms to machine learn what normal looks like. So for a certain company, a behavior is normal, and for another one, it isn't. However, it's not because it's machine learned that it is fast. It can take until 20 weeks in a complex organization to understand, to appreciate, to evaluate, and to recalculate these elementary weighting factors that you put on every of the tests that you achieve before decreting that one traffic is not legitimate. However, it is the future, absolutely, because the human brain is not fast enough. We're talking milliseconds sometimes between the various steps of an attack, and his memory not only is not big enough, but his memory can play tricks on us. When I was a cybersecurity analyst, anytime I would bump into an encryption algorithm and I would look at somewhere else than the router CPU usage goes to the roof in less than an hour, I would decree this is an attack. It's not the case today. You have perfectly legitimate encryption algorithm natively in some of the business critical application you can see on the right-hand side. So what was normal sometimes, or what was harmful a few hours ago can be legitimate. So if you use a human brain time-based recognition process, you would switch off thousands and thousands of legitimate users, and then that digital transformation KPIs indicators would flag red. Right? So we need. So what makes us think this is a right approach? Well, the fact that these platforms are being massively adopted in the last 2 years. This idea that I just explained, where networking and security have to be dealt as one, we experienced, well, you bought from us a growth of 96% of these offerings over the last 2 years. This is 10 times more than the market growth. So there must be something right in this holistic model. Same thing, you know, people say the cloud have saved us. It's not completely untrue, right? You can have low capex, but as a security officer, we say the asset, the data is our most precious asset, and the next thing we do is we spread it all over, right? So there is always something in us that say, am I completely tied into a cloud vendor roadmap at some point? And there has been a study that we published that says 74% of companies that are embarked in a massive digital transformation process bring something back in-house. Something back doesn't mean it's the end of the cloud. The cloud is probably one of the biggest trends we ever witnessed in IT. But it does mean that it's very practical to test an innovation, because you don't have to instrument it at the same time you develop it. You have all the Google Analytics of the world who say who connects to it, what part of the application is most used, where, what IP range, and etc. However, bringing the freedom back requires that your security policy sits on top of this cloud diversity. And last thing I want to conclude on, John is looking at me, is we're seeing at the edge of the network a new battlefield coming up. One of the consequences of 5G is not only that it's faster, but its latency is so better, so small, that it happens in the world of networks what happened in the world of management called empowerment of the edge. Put the center of decision closer to the centers of operation. This is how you can drive a car automatically. This is how you can do remote surgery, because the gesture of the surgeon that has taken him 40 years to learn can be achieved remotely, because the network would follow what he sees on the camera with a very low latency application. However, it opens new doors to hackers. It increases what we call the attack surface. So these are the three things that, in my opinion, have changed most in the last, I would say, 24 months. And this is why this presentation was entitled, Things Will Never Be the Same. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Just stay there. We have got a question on Slido that I'd like to put to you, which kind of links very, very nicely to that final slide. So what does this say? So you shared how digital innovation causes, or the connection between digital innovation and cyber risk. How is network and security convergence in financial services helping to address these threats? So are we seeing that convergence, actually that is helping to address this very thing?
Yeah, I see two contributions in the financial sectors that sort of have increased the convergence between network and security. The first one is, it was an absolute necessity for the financial sector to continue to innovate during the pandemic, this crazy period. It was not only about business continuity, being able to do the same things that we used to do 2 years before, but the financial sector had to be more innovative, had to be able to deal with the risk in a fine-tuning manner and elaborate the risk curves that correspond to this new situation, and they had to have this network and security convergence at the top of their worries. And at the same time, second reason, the networks are becoming a lot more efficient, faster, more reliable, more granular. We can do things that were just science fictions only 5 years ago. Dynamic micro-segmentation. You isolate an IP range in minutes based upon an attack that just happened. That is new. That is a great achievement, and it's been seen a lot in the financial sector.
Excellent stuff. Alan, thank you once more.
Thank you very much.
Excellent stuff. Let's talk about cyber skills. Let's talk about talent retention, the current cyber skills landscape, and the critical skills and talents that you need. We're going to do it in the company of Bharat Thakra, Head of Cybersecurity at the educational Peak Cyber Institute. Bharat, please.
John, thank you very much.
Great to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you, everyone, and it's good to be here in person. As always, I was talking to one or two people over there, and they were saying, although it's sparse, just having that human contact is just unbelievable. So thank you for everyone for putting that on. Now, Alan and Caroline before that talked about the paradigm shift, the transformation of cybersecurity. Now, in the technical sense, we've heard a lot about that in the process and everything like that. But the people side, that also needs to keep up in parallel with the technological advance that we're making. So I say that because what we're coming to is a bit of a crunch time in cybersecurity as far as skills and talent are concerned. Okay, I spent some time with the UK Cybersecurity Council. So this is a body that the government set up because they realized that the industry is becoming chaotic. We are desperate to get more talent and trained people into the industry, but they find it very difficult to navigate the landscape. It's very difficult to figure out exactly what career and certification and qualification you need. So the aim of that organization is to put a little more order in the industry and professionalize it. Let me ask you a question. This guy is offering a free Tesla. Why would you offer a free Tesla? I saw that on the Twitter in 2019. Okay. Larry Gadea, head of a technical engineering organization in San Francisco, is saying that if you were a recruitment executive, could hire him 5 engineers, he will give you a free Tesla. Okay. This just shows the level of thinking that's needed, the creativity, if you like, in this landscape, because we just can't find the right people. And what that means, on the one hand, it means that organizations can't progress their projects, the kind of work that Alan mentioned, Caroline mentioned, and all the speakers beforehand. I mean, this is heavy usage of manpower and intelligence. And if you can't keep up with the innovation because the people aren't there, then you're going to fall behind. But more importantly, it also means that organizations are open to attack because cybersecurity is not in place. And I want to show you, I've got quite a few slides, there's quite a bit of data I want to get through to show how hard this problem is at the moment. So I'm just going to cover 5 areas. This disruptive landscape that I mentioned. If we're talking about agile project management and agile technological development, well, we're talking about agile career management as well as what is the journey of an individual through our industry and through their life, and the big issue about retention. Now, on the whole, on the surface, you'd think, well, actually, we've got a brilliant industry. There are lots of job prospects, high salaries, challenging work, and actually, if you talk to everyone here, they've got brilliant career prospects. We are getting our handle on diversity, getting people from outside the industry coming in. And we also do a lot of good. We stop these attacks, we protect our industry, we protect individuals, and we protect the country. But actually, and on that basis, you could say, just like Carlsberg, it's probably the best industry in the world. But look at this. We've just been through a very difficult period, the pandemic, and there is something called the Great Resignation. Suddenly, people have uprooted, left their jobs, and looked for something else. Why is that? Well, 73% of the workers say that we actually like this remote idea. Now that I've gone back to work, I'm required to be in the office, I think I'll go and find someone where they allow me more of that. But half of them have said, well, actually, we're just burnt out. You know, I just want something different. My lifestyle priorities have changed. And others say that, hey, this has given me a chance to find myself. You know, who am I? Who is my authentic self? So it's given us an ability, a time period like no other, to take a step back, reflect. And you can see on this chart here, vacancies in the UK. So this is over the last year or so. First of all, it took a big dip because people lost their jobs and everything like that. And then suddenly, the job vacancies have gone through the roof. We can't find enough people to do. Obviously, we know the lorry drivers and a lot of the people in the retail industry, but this has gone right across the board now. And the other reasons were obviously because they want flexibility, new career goals, all of that. So what that has transpired is, if you look at some of the headlines, is actually digital skills shortage risks COVID recovery as young people shun IT courses. Failure to develop world-class skills in key growth industries will see UK fall behind. So this, in the broader industry, we can see now happening. And now this is a study by Ipsos Mori. It's actually based on a survey, and it's sponsored by, it's actually initiated by the Department of Culture, Media and Sports, DCMS. Okay, so this is an annual survey that they do. And I just want to take you through, it's a lot of information there, but it'll take you through a few of this. So it's split into two different types of skill. The basic skills, so we're talking about not the cybersecurity industry, but the whole country, businesses. And we're talking about, in the UK, we've got something like 1.3 million businesses. Okay. So 50% of them, 680,000, say that we don't have enough people to do the basic cybersecurity, cyber hygiene kind of work. Okay? And then about a third of them, of these companies, say we actually don't have people to do advanced cybersecurity work. So this is protecting these organizations. Okay. And the kind of work we're talking about advanced is penetration testing, forensic analysis. The basic is basically setting up firewalls and things like that, right? So, and what is it saying? 86% of the work is actually absorbed in other roles. So there isn't someone called a cybersecurity analyst or a cybersecurity engineer or a manager. That work is probably absorbed in the IT role. Only 7% of these organizations have specific cybersecurity roles. 7% of all UK businesses, or 26% of large businesses. So that sample has been separated into all businesses or large businesses. Okay. The other thing here, because of the lack of skills there, 45% of all businesses say their people, the cybersecurity people, are not confident of carrying out cyber risk assessment. So almost half the people are not, organizations saying we can't carry out basic cybersecurity assessments. And then I mentioned the pen testing. Only 25% of people say we're not confident of doing pen testing. Okay, so basically the message here is that because of the lack of skills, basic cybersecurity hygiene and some of the advanced stuff is not being done in UK organizations. You know, these are 1.3 million UK organizations. And then something else here. Only 18% of all organizations have done a formal cybersecurity training needs analysis. So what skills have our people got? What work are they required to do? And have they been trained for that? Only 18%. So what all this means, and this is another survey that the ISC Squared being one of the premier cybersecurity global institutes, they run a global study annually. And if you look at the figures from 2019, we're basically talking about what is the skills gap globally, and then it's broken down by those continents, those geographies. Okay, so in 2019, they were saying that we were short of 4 million people globally. Okay, it's gone down a bit, obviously, because of the pandemic, but you look at some of these other geographies, like if you look at Europe, we have a shortage of 200,000 qualified cybersecurity people. North America, similarly, a shortage of 400,000. Okay, and this is run annually. So this is current issue, okay? Currently, this is the status. And as you see, the numbers from 2019, 2020, and the solid ones are 2021. But what is going to hit this is what Alan was talking about, for instance, Internet of Things. Instead of having 100 million devices, we're talking about billions of devices. I think Cisco say that by 2024, we're talking about 50 billion devices globally. And Alan made the very strong point that these are like this. These devices are made as economic as possible, so by default, cybersecurity isn't built in, unless you go for the premier version. So what does that mean? So all that skill shortage, what does that mean? Well, you can see, a third of systems are misconfigured, not enough time for proper risk assessment. Some people aren't even qualified to do that. We saw previously patching, a key issue, time critical, much slower than it needs to be. Inability to remain aware of all the threats. So the threat intelligence, if you are able to afford that, means that it's not kept up to date. Oversight and rush. So this is the reason why we've got a cybersecurity problem globally. Okay? We haven't got the right people. Sometimes they're not trained, and the hackers are having a field day. So we've got this issue as well that if the numbers of people in the industry are small, we need more people, then the ones that are in the industry or very qualified actually have got lots of opportunities open to them, especially if they're well-trained, very experienced, knowledgeable. And so you find, so a survey by CyberEdge, again, ISC Squared sponsored, they're saying that actually, if you look around across the board, only 15% of people say, I'm happy where I am, I'm going to stay. Another 14 or 15% say, well, actually, I'm absolutely looking for another job. And then the mass of them, 70% say, well, if something came along, I might give it a go. So you can see the change that this is causing, the mobility, the dislocation. And why? Partly, this is very interesting, partly it's because they don't feel that people are listening to them. Okay, so it's not always money. They want clearly defined cybersecurity responsibilities. I need to know exactly what I'm required to do so I can measure myself. 60% almost say that they want training and technical investment prioritized. Now, if you talk about people in this room, we can almost do any training that we want to. But we're talking about the rest of the world here, the rest of the UK industry. And some other issues here. They wanted to expand their knowledge, increase credibility, improve job satisfaction. So you can see that the compensation question comes pretty low down. So it's not money that they're after. They just want the earlier point, get a real understanding of who they are, what they want in life, and they've had a chance to think about it. So it's this sort of thing. What it requires us to do is ask ourselves the difficult question and say, okay, I have a job, I have an income, I'm paying my mortgage and everything, but ultimately, what do I want? Is this it? Is this, am I happy for the next 5, 10 years? And if you look at the mass of people outside, this is what you see. These are multiple studies, and they say the same thing. About 70% of the population, working population, is disengaged. Okay, they are not committed to their jobs. They almost leave their creativity at the door. And again, sorry about the small writing, but let me just point out here, 50% of them say, we're not passionate about what I'm doing. So these are not cybersecurity people, this is just the general population, working population. 15% see no growth path. So how do you get over this? Okay, and it's affecting us. It's like what Thoreau said. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation and die with their soul still inside them. And this is almost a reflection of that, isn't it? So you have to ask yourself, are you in the right job? Again, we're talking about the majority of the people. Or are you this guy? Or are you this guy? Right, so what do our role models say? Seth Rogen, he's an expert marketeer, brilliant podcaster. So he says this is the case. Most people don't like their jobs. And Steve Jobs, basically the point he's making is actually don't do something if your heart's not in it. Find something that you're really, really passionate about because it's your life. And if you can't find it, keep looking. But when you do, then you'll know what it is, and you will never work another day. So, most people would say, actually, this is how a career goes. You start, you get your qualifications, you get some apprenticeship, job skills, and then suddenly you find yourself doing pretty well, promotion, career, and then you elevate yourself to senior management level. And then you have a nice pension waiting for you. Is this how it is? Now, it might have been, because if you take the case, I worked in BT for about 15 years, and it was not unusual to see someone leaving after 35 or 40 years. Okay, and if you look across the world, in Japan, there's the concept of the salary man. The organization basically ties you in from the day you leave your school till the day you retire, and you're basically wedded to that organization. And they do everything for you. But this is not the situation going forward, and particularly for the Gen Z. Okay, and they don't want this. The career might be like this. Okay? And they might decide that they're in it for the experience, and they're going to change their minds. And if we want that talent, and we do, because they are absolutely key to what organizations are trying to do, then we've got to adapt ourselves to that. So, and cybersecurity, I mentioned to you that I did some work with the UK Cybersecurity Association. It is really confusing. Trying to get through all that is not, we've not made it easy. Okay, so agile career management is around saying that what we need to do is to really listen to the individual, try and help them figure out what they want, and then design the career around them. And their focus will be, as I say, gaining experience, gaining that expertise, but they might not be loyal to you. Okay. So if you split the careers into 4 steps, the entry level, so where I work in Peak Cyber, we are helping individuals gain the first steps in the career ladder, getting them experience, and then identifying the role for them and making sure that's exactly what they want to do. And what that's allowed us to do is to say, okay, let's break this down. So if you look at the cybersecurity industry, there are people who are entering it, maybe when they do A-levels in the UK or their first degree. We also want people who are changing careers. There might be an accountant who might have spent 20 years, 15 years in another industry, but he would make a brilliant cybersecurity auditor with the right skills and everything. There are people in mid-careers who have been in the cybersecurity industry, but they're now questioning themselves and thinking, is this what I want to do? Their career might have plateaued. How do you help them? And then there are people who are late stages who actually have got a lot of experience, and it would be unwise to lose them if they can still contribute. But there might be a different way. They'll be needing a different requirement to the others. So the first thing really is to try and figure out what it is that what is that you want to do. And this question is from, the Greeks. The unexamined life is not worth living. So you need to examine your life and figure out if this is cybersecurity. Because what is expensive is someone actually comes into the industry, we spend a lot of money, and then they say, no, actually, I'm a yoga teacher. It's not really, this is not my thing. But by that time, the lesson needs to be learned before that. So there are 3 big questions. Discover your purpose. Who am I? Where am I going? What do I want to do? And then what's my plan? Okay. And in a sense, so if you are managing people coming into your company, newcomers or career changers, then you want to go through some of this with them or help them go through that. Because again, like I say, what is expensive, what is difficult, what is, you end up in tears is if you find the square peg in the round hole. And what happens is that is then the type of person who, we said earlier, isn't passionate, and it's the 70-odd% people who come to work just for something. And one way of figuring out is, what is their mindset? Is it a job mindset? In other words, are they here because they want to take the paycheck home and they've got something else that they're passionate about? Have they got a career mindset, which is like, well, actually, I just see this as another job because I want to advance, and my end goal is somewhere higher up? Or is it a purpose mindset, which is like, I'm actually into what I'm doing now? That's an internal driver. And if you are able to do that, then in your team, and if you can find the purposeful mindset, then that is a high-functioning, high-creativity team. You could use other things like personality tests, and there are quite a few to choose from. Myers-Briggs, I'm sure people are aware of, color tests, 16 personalities. All of these have got an element where it might be for your team or for yourself if you went through that process. So just looking at the career changer, so we're talking about someone coming from outside the industry into cybersecurity. Well, the key, like this accountant, is what transferable skills can we use and can we enhance? Is it the right industry? Because they'll find everything that's new. Have they got the right mentality to learn? Because cybersecurity is fast changing. You really need to pick up things quickly. But we might need to help them in figuring out exactly what level they enter at. They might not want to be coming down at the bottom end, but if someone with a 10 or 15-year background in accountancy, we might be able to find them the right role. Key is actually having a mentor and having networks around them. They feel wanted and at home. Okay. And there are various different frameworks to help. You know, the Bloom's taxonomy is the basis of this. And basically that says that as you advance, you'll be doing higher value work. So you can start by following something or assisting, but eventually what you want to do is influence that issue and be able to creatively modify it and change it. And so there are the Sophia network, framework for the information age. So that is a very formal method of figuring out where an accountant is, and then how can we help them transition into cybersecurity, at what level, okay, what skill set. And other cybersecurity institutes also have quite a lot of information, frameworks and things like that that we could use. What about the midlifer? Someone who's been in the organization, but now is finding that they are running out of ideas and they're just kind of making up the numbers. What can we do there? Well, if they have the ability or want to advance to the senior level, then that's an option. But a lot of them would have plateaued and stalled. And how can we use that? And people will be with a mindset that's regretful. Maybe I didn't manage to do everything I wanted to do. So we've got to be able to cope with that. So there are some specific questions to ask there. But a framework like this also helps us figuring out how do we help advance people already in the industry. So there might be a pen tester, looking at the middle row there, who might be aspiring to be a cybersecurity architect. What is the specific set of activities, qualifications, help, project, mindset that we need to help him or her, move through that? So he might be a level 2 pen tester. He might not be able to go to a level 2 architect, but he can maybe over 6 months with a defined program. Okay, so these are the kind of things that you might need to put in place specifically for one person wanting absolutely clear that I want to move from one to the other. So here we go, whoops. So it might be that they need some formal qualification, but maybe micro-learning, learning at the point of use. What is that exact thing that I need? Because I've been set a project that's going to help me become an architect, and I need to advance through that, but I need specific help either from a buddy, a mentor, an AI system, and do we put that in place? Because that is the kind of thing that helps with retention. Okay, if the organization knows that there's someone behind my back looking after me, helping me with this, because I've figured out where I want to go, then that's the kind of thing that would really help. And then the late stager. Okay, their focus is much on what can I give back to the community, how can I utilize my skills and pass that on to other people. There could be volunteering, there could be mentoring, there could actually be non-exec directors. Again, their skill set and the experience is really valuable for other people to take on board. Or they can be an advisor or return back to academia. So, final thing, this retention. If we take on board some of the things that are mentioned, well, that's really what is the factors that's going to help with retention. If we figure out what the skills and what's their skills, and then what are the areas they want to go in, and how do we transition them, identify career goals. Are they really plugged into the professions? Because they are very helpful as well in terms of training. How do we get them to stand out from the crowd? How do we allow them to have a brand and help them with that? And maybe it's flexibility, 3-day week that they want. So it's agile career management. You've got to be on top of this. Otherwise, talented people have got lots of places to go to. So, John.
Brilliant stuff. Barrett, thank you very much indeed. We are running against time, so you're going to stick around for coffee right now, aren't you? So any questions for Barrett, grab him.
Thank you.
Not too hard, but grab him and ask him those questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Excellent stuff. So let's take a coffee break now. We'll start again at 22 the hour. We've got more AI, we've got more leadership, and then we'll wrap things up for today. Thank you all very much indeed.
Yeah, hello? Hello? Yeah. Good.
Let me put it there. Good. Right, I think we'll get going. I'll just do a quick intro from here. Okay, everybody. Welcome back. We're into the final stretch of day one of the conference. We have got a closing keynote around cybersecurity leadership coming up. Before that, we're going to hear from Baldeep Dogra, Director Solutions Marketing at BlackBerry, and we're going to talk and we're going to return to the subject of AI. Baldeep, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much. Yeah, good to be here, everybody. Today I'm going to take you through the role AI plays in cyber resilience, in sustaining cyber resilience. And it's really good to see Carolyn's session earlier on. I thought you did a fantastic job. But I'll give you some insight into the specific role that AI can play when done properly. So you've seen a lot of this already today, the change, the shift in the work environment, hybrid working. I'm not going to introduce any more new terms to you. You'd be happy to know. But let's look at it from the perspective of risk. The home networks, for example, a lot of people were forced to work from home, forced to use their home networks, where probably their children are playing on PlayStations or Xboxes with their open NATs. There's a risk to using SaaS apps in open networks like that. We've also got a risk from the fact that folks had to use their own desktops and laptops from home. They were forced to do that because companies weren't ready for this new BYOD situation that they were thrown into. So there was a poor BYOD deployment that they needed to look at fixing. So there's a lot of risk. I put this up on purpose because there was a study done by Deloitte where they concluded before the pandemic that the financial services industry was the most targeted industry. And this was kind of brought up by the Fed as well in the US. I think they came up with a figure of 39% of all attacks target the financial services industry. It's a big problem. Most attacks are about money. So who do they go after? Right, they go after financial services. A lot of money spent on IT budget because of this. This is pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. I think the FBI actually came out with a figure of 300% increase in cyber attacks, and there was a related increase in expenditure on the back of that as well. Here's some examples of, and you saw ransomware earlier on today, the fact that it's really increasing. Here's some examples. The Revel ransomware attack, for example, impacted co-op stores where they couldn't, their stock inventory software just couldn't function, so they had to close their co-ops down. Then you saw the continuing impact of Microsoft infrastructures, Hafnium, for example, and then also the Colonial Pipeline. That's a great example. DarkSide had impacted the Colonial Pipeline, and they shut them down for days. And even though they paid $4.4 million ransom, they lost about 10 times that much in lost operating costs. Right, so ransomware is a huge problem. Andrew Bailey was looking at, cloud services in financial services is something that wasn't looked at before. People in financial services thought, cloud is that place we do not want to go. We don't know how secure it is, but over the past few years, you're seeing more and more cloud services deployed. It's huge, but Andrew said, we want to make sure that we're resilient, right? We want to make sure that financial services companies are resilient to move into the cloud and any risks that come about on the back of that. So they worked with the PRA and FCA in developing this statement of policy, which you're all familiar with, but wanted to pick out three points from the summary of that statement of policy. Prevent disruption through operational resilience, adapting when incidents happen, being able to adapt to them, and preparing for future disruption. Prepare, prevent, respond. You'll hear analysts like Gartner talk about this a lot, right? And you'll hear a lot of cyber security companies like ours responding to that as well and having their own solutions. To us, and I've highlighted the word prevent. Prevent is very, very important in how you begin this journey, because when you prevent something from happening, then you can rely less on on fixing something after it's happened, because then you're losing money, you're losing your operations as well. So you want to be resilient to those threats. Now the SOC teams, depending on the size of your company, you may have a SOC team, you might not, but everyone has a security team that's dedicated to making sure that operational resilience is maintained. And the SOC team is generally the ones in the firing line. They're seeing 1.1 million cases of novel malware being created every day. That's a lot. They work in operational product silos. There's 40 plus products typically. Our research team came out with these figures. There's a lot of data, right? There's so much data coming in from all sorts of different directions that they need to look at, whether it's endpoints from the network, from the cloud. And they get what we call alert fatigue. And this kind of increased when the pandemic started. Alert fatigue, 11,000-ish alerts per day is a lot to deal with. And what we want to do is help the SOCs to evolve into a more integrated security platform so that these alerts are dealt with immediately, so that they can work with all the different software vendors out there. I mean, you want to reduce the number of software vendors you work with anyway, but we want to work properly with them. So that gives us a problem statement for cyber resilience, all right, in the industry. You want to keep your data safe. You want to stay ahead of cyber threats. But most importantly, you want to empower your users. They're the ones who, for the long and short, they make the money for the company, right? They're the ones who are doing all the work. So you want happy users. You want them to use whatever device they want to use to a certain degree. You want to make sure that the devices they're using are safe, and you want to make sure that the data, the organization data that they are using is also safe, and the apps that they're using it on. Now, when you think about the threats out there, and I'm going to give you a very small history lesson here. In the past, we had antiviruses, 30 years ago, for those of you old enough to remember. You had a virus, you had a human response to a human problem, a human curated response to a human curated problem. And that response typically was, it could be days, it could be weeks, depending on when it happened and how they responded. Over the years, that response time was reduced to hours through additional services like HIPS, anti-exploitation, sandboxing, isolation techniques, threat feeds, determining threat feeds. And that brought response times to malware to minutes, all right, and hours. And then EDR was actually the first revolution. Right? I say now because EDR is still around and it's still very strong. EDR has been around for about 15 years. It brought the response time down to seconds and minutes. The problem with all of these solutions is, and you probably heard me say consistently, is response. Right? They're all about responding. They're reactive. And they all require what we call in the industry a patient zero. So something has to be impacted for you to be able to deal with it, so because you understand it. So now you are detecting and you're responding. And then you're understanding, so the next time that happens, you can stop it. But what if that next thing has actually evolved? You've got to let it become a patient zero again. So it's semi-automated, it's very reactive, and things do happen. You do get breaches. So another revolution was needed, and that's where two guys from McAfee, one of them, Stuart McClure, said he's fed up of being the chief apology officer at McAfee. They started a company called Cylance, and they wanted to bring a prevent-first approach, and they thought the only way we can do that is to do it using AI. And they hired the smartest, cleverest minds that they could find at the time, about 12 years ago, and they developed the first agent about 10 years ago, which is now in its 8th generation, which means it's learned a lot. So it's AI based on machine learning. Most importantly, it gave a proactive way to deal with threats. So now you don't need a patient zero. You don't need to be affected at all. It's pre-execution. The way it works, and you heard Carolyn say this so well earlier on, basically you collect files, you collect the data. When you extract that data, you basically train your model, you cluster all of that data, and then you put labels on it, right, to put it very, very simply. And those labels help you learn and understand how it's going to be later on. We don't share our machine learning model with anyone, even when we do testing. You're going to see later on, you can talk to us at the booth about what SE Labs concluded yesterday, actually, about our solution. We don't give them our model, and when we do allow them to test, we do it in isolation. So we don't let anyone, we don't let our model near anybody. So it's continually learning. A machine learning model is only as good as it learns and how much it learns. I think we've learned about just over 1.5 trillion files in the past 8 years. And as it's developing, it's getting smarter. And right now, we're trying to get this model ready for the next generation, the next revolution that's needed, and that's quantum computing. And that's going to bring about a whole new level of opportunities for everybody, but also threats. And AI, you need something quick enough, something fast enough to be able to work in the quantum world. Right, so, but be careful out there. You'll hear a lot of people saying they have AI, where in essence it's actually possibly a spreadsheet with a little algorithm, and humans need to go in and update it, and they get responses through whatever analysis tool they use, and they've got to go and update it, and you've got EDR as well, falls into that, because it's required to catch breaches and then learn. That's not really AI, right? It's kind of pattern recognition, as it were. Real AI gives you prevention. It gives you pre-execution capabilities, and you don't need to update it. The previous solutions were all signature-based. I don't know how many of you guys used McAfee and solutions like that, but every Friday I'd get a signature update, and it would take hours and take up a lot of space. And even when it's running, when it's doing a scan of your PC, it's taking up a lot of processing power. Having this this agent on your machine runs at 0.02% of your CPU. It's hardly anything. It's very, very lightweight. And most importantly, it works in air-gap networks. You heard a previous speaker, I forgot his name, I apologize, talking about IT and OT convergence. Right? Now, OT, operational technology, that's a great example of where you have isolated networks working within a wider organization. And anybody can go in, sneak in, drop some mail, and then run out again. And if you don't have any protection in there, then you're going to be impacted quite a bit. So air-gap networks is very, very important. So what does AI mean for financial services? Helps you build your cyber defenses, helps you boost your financial services workflows. Think about fraud detection. I mean, we're working with a couple of banks on one of our solutions and how we can develop that into a fraud detection and mitigation solution. So there's a lot of opportunities around scaling payment systems as well. And then empowering your users. Now they can use whatever they want, wherever they want. And now you can think about their behavior. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So, a speaker before mentioned zero trust as well. Zero trust is a concept that was developed by Forrester a few years ago, actually. And it was first a hardware-based capability, but it's very much software. Now, it's all about trust after verification, right? He's right. The zero trust, the way it's written, it doesn't sound very good. But it's basically trusting after verification. Once you're verified, you enter this trust zone. And you see I've got there in the middle, data. It's all about data. It's all about, how is that data accessed? How is that data used? Where is that data used? Who's using that data? Right, so what we're talking about essentially is endpoints, your apps that you're using that data on, the network you're using your endpoint on, and the people, the users. Now, this is great for a static use case, right? Your endpoint. It's just the endpoint at a specific point in time. What happens if that user now moves? If that user's moving, traveling, using another app where they're not supposed to, possibly. There's lots of use cases like that. And you have to now adapt. Right? How do you adapt? A lot of, you'll hear UEBA solutions out there. They're quite static in that they will look at, they will do analytics on log files and then allow you to adapt to that. By then, the situation would have changed. So you've got to be dynamic. You've got to have what we call adaptive risk scoring through continuous authentication, because you'll have a changing trust zone. Right? So what we've got is, I don't want to introduce another concept for you, but this is that's just been put out to market by one of the analysts. It's called the cybersecurity mesh. So this is now taking zero trust into the third dimension. It's basically saying you have users that are moving. They have certain behaviors. They are working on service nodes, which could be on-prem service nodes, cloud, SaaS apps, data centers, operational technology nodes, that kind of thing. But they're also moving, right? So this dynamic behavior needs to be accounted for, right, through what we call real-time monitoring. And that will mean that when they move through these trust zones, those trust zones will adapt. We call them adaptive trust zones. They can now access their data anywhere, anytime, from any endpoint. But now you're accounting for the user. And I've got the use case up there, fraud detection, which is a great example of where you can use this. This access control interaction will allow you to adapt to the user now. Now it's all about the user behavior. You can actually, we have, our UEBA solution is called Persona. Persona will look at how the user will use their device by, how they swipe, whether it's up or down, left, right, how often they do it, what apps they use, where they use these apps, and literally account for that and learn from what they're doing, learn from that behavior and adapt accordingly. Similarly, on the desktop, how they use their mouse, right? And could somebody else have sat down in a user's chair and started to use their machine? So you can actually pick that out very quickly, and it could stop that malicious user from using that particular device or machine. And then the adaptive risk scoring, so the admin also gets benefit out of this because they don't have to keep changing policies. It's done automatically. I was working, one of my banking customers told me once that they had 7 personas that covered 100,000 users. This can potentially give you 100,000 personas, but without doing it 100,000 times, right? You just need to do it once. So that's the cybersecurity mesh. So just to kind of close up here, to summarize, stay on top of your events. It's not just about software and solutions. It's about hygiene, right? It could be about just making sure that insider threats, we haven't spoken too much about the users, but we could. Insider threats, make sure that users are educated with cyber hygiene. Make sure you're looking at zero trust. Make sure you're looking at user behavior. Make sure that potential user workarounds are closed. You close those loops. And think about your data, right, coming from all sources. I haven't really spoken much about XDR, but consider supporting how your SOC will benefit from having managed XDR, for example, right? XDR will let you get visibility from all your data sources and analyze it in one central point. And with that, please talk to us at the booth. We can talk to you about what the SE Labs said about us. They gave us this award yesterday, actually, and I quickly put it in the slide deck today. Best Endpoint Protection Provider, which is, finally we're seeing folks understand that AI does actually bring a benefit, because a lot of other analysts didn't really understand that. They will soon, but that's a good thing. But come and talk to us. Thank you.
Nice updating of the slides. We've got a couple of questions here. Address these if you can.
Yeah.
Is the 300% increase in cyber crime reported by the FBI because the criminals were working from home and became more productive?
He's a very positive guy, Peter Warren. Yeah, I think so. I think, no, they're working from home. They were forced to use equipment that they weren't thinking of using. So they were using their personal apps on these machines. And all they need to do is click a phishing link or a spare phishing link. That's all it takes, really.
Very good. Second question. The difference between machine learning and rules-based learning, what is the difference between?
Yeah, you need to talk to somebody more technical than me. But yeah, machine learning, we learn from files what's good, what's bad, and then we cluster that information. Rules-based is more kind of feature-based, depending on what it is you're looking for, and it knows what it wants to look for. And I don't know if I'm going to answer that very well.
Fair enough. In which case, let me ask you a question about, you introduced us to this, what's it called, cybersecurity mesh?
Yeah.
Certainly introduced me to it.
Yeah.
And you talked about the connection between that and the extended detection response, XDR. So just briefly, how do those two things play against each other or play with each other?
The mesh concept will enhance it. So XDR brings its ability to get visibility into all of your estate, right? Your endpoints, your data, wherever it is, however it comes in. But like I mentioned before, what about if that data is moving? What about if it's dynamic data? Now you need to look at your users. They're the dynamic ones. They're the ones who you can't predict. You can probably predict what endpoints can do, but what about users? So what the mesh will do is allow you to kind of bring that into your XDR strategy and understand how that behavior will impact your data analysis. And you need a data lake for that, and that's something you'll hear more of.
Very good. Baldeep, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we are nearly at a close. We've got one final closing keynote, conscious cybersecurity leadership. Darren's not here. He's on a video. Again, we'll hope the technology works. So Darren Argyle is the Group Chief Information Security Risk Officer at Standard Chartered Bank, and he's pre-recorded about 20 minutes, and then we will wrap up. So I'll leave you in the capable hands of Darren, I think.
Thank you to the New Statesman for inviting me to deliver this keynote address today. I'm delighted to be able to share my thoughts with this group, especially because I know this audience includes some of the most influential organisations within our sector. So my name is Darren Argyle, and I'm the Chief Information Security Risk Officer, or CISRO, at Standard Chartered Bank, and I'm currently based in Singapore, where we have colleagues across the globe in the UK, Poland, Singapore, Malaysia, and many other countries across Asia and Africa. As CISRO, I lead the bank's second line of defence for information and cybersecurity, reporting to the Chief Risk Officer, working closely with my colleagues in the first line and third line to secure the bank and its customers and its clients. I've held this role now for just over 2.5 years, but I've worked in cybersecurity for over two decades, holding CISO roles at Qantas Airlines in Australia and IHS Markets, a global fintech which is headquartered in the UK, following senior leadership roles such as Symantec, IBM, and others. As well as my leadership role at Standard Chartered, I've also founded the Cyber Leadership Institute, a cybersecurity careers accelerator hub for professionals, with programs designed to provide the necessary skills to help participants thrive in their roles, supported by a global community. And so, based on my experience to date, including the last 2 years leading a team at the bank during the pandemic, I'd like to share with you some of my leadership reflections. Over the next 15-20 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about conscious leadership, which means both in theory and practice, and how we can continue to learn and improve throughout our leadership journeys. So firstly, I'm going to discuss the role of cyber leadership and the attention it's drawing, including the challenges. Secondly, I'm going to talk about some of the key responsibilities of cyber leaders and how I see the role. And finally, I'm going to discuss three key principles, which I think, if cyber leaders have at the front of their mind, would represent conscious leadership in this space, and some of the actions these leaders can take to embed this in their thinking and also across their organizations. So over the last few years, there's been significant effort to make business, including board members and CEOs, aware of the scale of cyber risk posed by malicious cyber actors and the challenge involved in achieving cyber resilience. At the same time, there have been major cyber incidents in recent years. SolarWinds comes to mind, and the growing prevalence of ransomware. Board and businesses' awareness of cyber risk has been a positive one in terms of empowering cyber leaders, often providing them with substantial budgets and resources. And this, combined with the booming cyber solutions industry, is driving demand for talented individuals in this field. And in particular, what leadership skills are required to accelerate career paths of cyber professionals and how they should approach it. It's not uncommon to see this discussion in some of the biggest publications out there, including the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and of course the New Statesman itself. But accompanying these expectations to deliver cyber resilience to organization, which involves leadership, galvanizing the whole team and supporting functions, this pandemic has increased the pressure on leaders and their teams. And the theme here that CISOs are experiencing significant stress is something I want to talk about. As you'll see from this slide, a large majority, in terms of 80% of colleagues, said they had suffered either moderate or high stress. And this was impacting their mental health. The other stats also tell a pretty tough story. Over half of CISOs report excessive expectations on them and their colleagues and from their superiors. The average tenure or time in roles for CISOs is just over 2 years, which is relatively short. And often they've cited pressure involved in the role for leaving such roles. And also, 90% of CISOs would happily reduce their income for a reduction in the stress that they face. This paints a shocking picture, and there are lots of similar statistics which I could quote at length. In one response, 2019 survey aiming to understand the modern CISO, roughly 1 in 6 CISOs said they had turned to medication or alcohol to deal with the stress. With CISOs feeling the level of stress, it's not difficult to see how they would want to need a different kind of leadership and want to be more effective and sustaining pursuing cyber resilience, or for that matter, any other objective. In VMware's 2021 Global Incident Response Threat Report, 67% of respondents said they had to take time off because of stress in their jobs, while fully 65% of those citing burnout, and they had considered leaving their jobs altogether. With the industry facing a talent shortage of over 4.1 million, in fact, these are unfulfilled roles, this only puts additional pressure on cyber leaders and their leadership teams. There are, of course, various ways in which people can approach leadership. So it's worth us thinking about the different responsibilities and roles played by cyber leaders, and collectively what is expected of us. The pressure on cyber leader is now on many fronts. Technical skills, knowledge, and practical experience that can be applied. Being able to positively influence the board and business leaders, communicating the impact of cyber risk to make it meaningful and raise the appropriate funding. The ability to drive transformation programs to achieve risk reduction, culture change, and manage regulatory expectations. And furthermore, especially in the face of COVID, leaders are struggling with the capacity challenges and filling their talent pipeline. With the role that is constantly evolving, it's essential in my view that cyber leaders need to identify their key priorities and values and become conscious of what is needed to not only drive delivery of sustainable cyber resilience, but also positive culture within their teams and the stakeholders with which they interact with. So, how can cyber leaders be more conscious with their leadership styles? What exactly do I mean by this? The headline is that we must take on strategic leadership roles within our organizations, particularly during times of crisis like we have now. And still, going through this is very challenging. This means understanding the needs of employees in difficult times, whilst continuing to provide consistent messaging around the importance of focusing on the fundamental requirements and reducing the risk we face. Earlier this year, I wrote an article where I suggested 3 key principles which I believe can help leaders adopt this approach. Empowering our colleagues to make risk-based, informed decisions, continuing the pursuit of cyber resilience, whilst understanding that during such challenges, they have competing priorities. You'll see on the slide, I use the words strategic and empathetic. The first of these is relatively self-explanatory. Cyber leaders must be strategic thinkers, able to influence internal and external stakeholders whilst building a secure ecosystem. The latter, perhaps, is less obvious, but there has been a definitive focus on this more broadly in leadership teams in recent times. Recent research by The Catalyst, a global non-profit that helps build workspaces that work for women, suggests that empathetic leaders can have a significant impact on innovation, engagement, and retention and inclusivity, as well as work-life balance. Related to this is significant benefits to teams when leaders open up to their teams, speaking to them and being vulnerable without oversharing. This can improve the closeness of teams and help them succeed. Firstly, I think cyber leaders must adopt a more human approach whilst building cyber resilience. Human means that thinking about people at every step in the cybersecurity journey, and this must be at the front of cyber leaders' minds. While human resilience and innovation drive transformation, we must recognise the need to bring teams through this change, supporting them as much as we can in whichever way we can. This means things like working flexible patterns, and it's an obvious example here, but there's also more subtle examples, setting expectations around well-being, working hours, including the swift responses to those out-of-hour emails that are simply not required. Setting the expectation to see team members, finding time to sit down with them when often calendars are blocked out, but also making sure that they're not blocked out just for meetings, but also for exercise, relaxation, or even meditation. It's key for leaders to maintain perspective, including that we must be pursuing resilience rather than absolute perfect security, which is simply impossible. We need to ensure that while we are pursuing resilience at an acceptable, sustainable pace for the organisation, the key is to build resilient and fulfilled workforce to support the cyber crucial businesses that we as an enabler. Building teams with high adversity quotient, which is a strong capacity to adapt to the challenging conditions and recover rapidly from disruptions. This can support employee retention and embed cyber resilience focus. Secondly, creativity. Proactive while keeping our eye on the crown jewels. Cyber leaders need to think and act strategically, but more importantly, ruthlessly prioritise resources and investment on the crown jewels. The highest risk areas where we must prioritise our remediation efforts. This is by far most efficient in putting the pressure on our teams to fix everything. Identify and protect those information assets of greatest value that would cause business impact if compromised. However, it's clearly also more sustainable in the long run to build security from the outset wherever we can, focusing on the crown jewels. We should have a holistic view on critical services and encourage our teams, particularly in challenging times, to focus on protecting what is most vital to our organisations and look at that repeatedly. Motivating employees to achieve risk reduction requires focus on businesses and client outcomes. Employees need to buy into these objectives, focusing not only what needs to be done to be achieved, but why things need to be done and how organisations will achieve it. This is one of the key areas where strategic leadership can focus on supporting the employees, helping reinforce the broader context rather than the immediate task in hand. And lastly, cyber leaders must speak the language of the stakeholders to support cyber risk decision-making. Risk must be communicated to cyber leaders in ways that they can understand and appreciate. This is a fundamental practice of a cyber leader and something that they need to focus on and be straightforward with their communication, which also helps with governance requirements as well. If a company is subject, for example, as a distributed denial of service attack, communication must be simple and tangible so they understand the impact. As an example, how long will websites be down? What is the potential financial impact of downtime? Can we explain in plain English what a DDoS attack is? And also cultivate an environment where everyone feels at ease to ask questions. Value at risk models, sometimes referred to as VAR, and we look at models such as FAIR, which is the factor analysis and information risk, quantifies cyber risk and articulates it in financial terms. This can help senior business stakeholders move away from unhelpful, imprecise and scaremongering language and focus on decisions based on a financial result. Informal cyber communities have provided some great support over the years and has helped the profession develop to where we see it today. But we need to formalise these and we need to expand these communities to provide cyber leaders with the right support and sharing of industry best practice on digital platforms. All this is critical if organisations are to develop and maintain cyber resilient culture. So, in conclusion, ultimately, just as cyber criminals are continuously adapting their methods, it's important that cyber leaders reflect, innovate, and also grow too, protecting clients whilst also understanding the needs of colleagues makes risk reduction challenge sustainable and long-term. In the new digital norm, conscious leadership is therefore not just an aspiration, but a responsibility of all cyber leaders globally. Thank you for listening for me today. And once again, thank you to the New Statesman for the opportunity to deliver this keynote address. And I hope you found this session useful today. Thank you.
Excellent stuff. Thank you, Darren, remotely at least. That's it for today. We're back again tomorrow morning, starting again about 9. Get here early for breakfast. For those of you who are logging on remotely, 9 o'clock we'll kick off tomorrow. Got a whole bunch of things. Just want to quickly, very quickly, I promise, some of the things that I've taken away from today, some of the things that I've learnt. Most of these are numbers. So we learned that 61% of CISOs believe their employees will cause the next data breach. We also learned that 58% of security breaches involve internal threat actors, which seems to support the above, and that of those 58%, 62% of that result of careless behavior. We learned that the 3 most impersonated brands are Microsoft, Adobe, Standard Bank. We learned that there are nearly 200,000 unfilled cybersecurity roles across Europe, and we learned the difference between poisoning evasion and inference attacks when it comes to machine learning and AI, and we learned a whole lot more as well. So fantastic day. Looking forward to welcoming you again tomorrow. We're going to hear from, among others, during tomorrow morning, the Bank of England, Lloyds Banking Group, Atom Bank, MasterCard, Credit Suisse, and Schroders Personal Wealth. Once again, I'd just like to thank our sponsors. So Mimecast, ZeroFox, Symantec, Broadcom, Proofpoint, Synopsys, BlackBerry, Fortinet, Trend Micro, Cyberint, Agari, Cybersprint, Digital Shadows, RevBits, and Tessian. Thank all of them. There are drinks for those of you in the room just behind you. Please stick around if you can. Otherwise, we will see you in the morning. Thank you all very much indeed.